Everybody, Mark Williams from Circle of the Dark Mother. I'm going to cover or today read from my book, Embracing Lilith, the myth in the book, part 21. Chapter 20. Now, when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. First Kings 10:1. One day in my travels, I heard the name of Solomon, a great king of Israel, said to know great magic and be a follower of Yahweh Elohim. I decided I need to meet this man to make sure he was not Samael or one of his agents. I knew I could not meet a king as easily as I could any other man, so I used my power to gain wealth and followers. I took the form of Bilquis, which I had used many years before in Africa, and took up the identity of the Queen of Sheba. I gathered my entourage, packed a profusion of luxurious gifts, and headed for Jerusalem. Our great procession drew much attention, and some people began following us to see where we were going and what would come to pass. Wherever we went, large crowds of people and much fanfare traveled with us. I was somewhat surprised no one stopped us or asked about our intentions, but I guess with wealth comes power. We met with no questioning at all until we approached the gate of Jerusalem. At this point, a city guard came forward, bowing, and asked what business we had in the city. I loudly proclaimed, I am the great queen of Sheba, and I have come to hold court with the famed King Solomon. I have many gifts and jewels for him. The guard surprised me somewhat when he proclaimed, Welcome, Your Highness, and bowed again without any more questions. My own guards and I were led to the palace, while the rest of my entourage were taken to the stables and other areas for visitors. I directed one of my servants to follow us, wheeling a great chest of gold and jewels to present to Solomon. When we entered the throne room, the king had obviously been alerted to my approach because he had donned his finest robes and seated himself in a grand chair with an identical one next to it. He bid me to sit and rest after my arduous journey. I, of course, didn't tell him I felt no pain or fatigue from the trip. After all, I wasn't human, but he didn't need to know that. I had my servant bring over the chest of gifts, and I presented them to Solomon. This is an offering of my great esteem, after all I've heard about your wisdom and accomplishments. He showed little interest in the wealth before him, but he attended my every word and gestured closely. He said, Thank you for your great generosity. One of his guards dragged the chest away to be added to the rest of his great wealth. So why have you traveled all this way to Jerusalem? To meet you, of course, I replied. Just to see me? Certainly, I'm not that interesting, great queen. He smiled with just enough coyness to make his denial plausible. But this man obviously knew his worth and knew how truly compelling he was. Oh, I disagree, my king. You are a fascinating man. I've heard of your wisdom, your wealth, and your great power over magic. He asked, Are you interested in the arcane arts as well? I paused to get a sense of him. I felt no deception and no taint of Samiel. I perceived Solomon as truly a mortal man, but he also had sorcery all around him, wearing it on his person as others would wear a coat. I found myself intrigued. Yes, I am. I am but a humble student, but find the workings of magic captivating. I have some small talent. We spoke for hours, and I found myself at ease with this man who seemed more approachable than many with less wealth or power. As night approached, he told me rooms had been prepared for me and my servants, and I could stay however long I wished. I took him up on his offer. At that time, I only had thought I would stay a week or two, but as fate would have it, I fell totally and truly in love with King Solomon, and he with me. We studied, worked, rolled, and made love together. When we married, I attained true happiness for the first time in my entire existence. He wrote a great poem about me that is included in both the Hebrew and Christian Bibles. It was the first time anyone had written something of beauty about me. Solomon confided his desire to build a temple to Yahweh, which would rival any temple ever built. The Israelites had the Ark of the Covenant and other holy relics he wished to give a truly special home. He lamented he didn't have the manpower or time for such an undertaking because what he envisioned would take thousands of men decades to complete. After we had been together for a few years, I decided to give my love a special gift. I fashioned a ring with a sigil on it. The seal would later be called the Seal of Solomon. Its magical intent was to be able to protect his owner and control demonic forces. It took the secret name of God, a great deal of my power, and all of my knowledge of sorcery to craft the ring. But on our anniversary, I presented my husband what I had made. He thought it lovely, and he could sense that magic was pouring out of the sigil. What marvel have you given me, my dear? He placed the ring on his right hand index finger. It fit perfectly. Something to fulfill your deepest desire, I said coyly. He looked at me with a huge grin. Tell me more. Let's go out to the mount where you wish to build your temple. I led him by the hand, and we walked over to the site where he wished to build the temple of Yahweh. I motioned for the guards to stop short of our destination, where they couldn't see everything that transpired. In years past, they would have balked, but now they knew to trust me. I spoke softly. Don't be afraid of what you're going to see. Your ring will protect us and give you the power to control what comes. I wasn't too worried about Solomon's reaction. I knew him to be a skilled sorcerer who had seen many wonders and horrors in his life. I reached out and released magic, and the dark power from within me snaked out in the night. I called forth and opened a portal between our world and the dark realm where I had created to imprison the demons from India long ago. My power reached in, pulled them all out into the world, but kept them contained. The strongest of the collection spoke up and said, "What do you wish of us, mistress?" They all bowed slightly, knowing I could send them back to their private hell anytime I wished. Mistress, Solomon said with a smirk, you never cease to amaze me. Servants, this is Solomon, my husband. You will obey him as you would obey me. He has strong magic I have granted him, which protects him from you and allows him to control you. If you do not obey, you will be destroyed. Those of you who perform well in service may be released from bondage in time. They all nodded in unison and looked directly at Solomon. Go ahead, my dear, tell them what you want. They will take your verbal commands, and if you consciously think something to them, they will be able to picture it through the power of the magic I have given you. Well, all right. I want to build a great temple in this place. I'm thinking of where the plans are located. One of you go retrieve them with no distraction on your route here or back. One of the demons disappeared and reappeared, carrying the plans for the temple. Begin the construction. A flurry of activity arose and the building of the temple commenced. Humans finished off details during the day, but at night the demons took over and built the mass of the structure. Instead of decades, the temple only took 7.5 years to complete. During the building, several of the demons rebelled and I had to destroy them, but the majority remained faithful. I eventually released the most worthy ones, but bound them against hurting one in Solomon's domain. I returned others who had not performed as well to the dark realm I had created for them. I was careful not to create any Lilith during my time with Solomon, because I loved him too much to give him children he could never really know. He had several human children from concubines, and I treated them all like my own. While with him, I also had no dreams of my creation. It was as if I had been given a reprieve from the pull of my destiny, so I could concentrate on creating a temporary life for myself. As time progressed, I made my appearance age so people didn't wonder how I had eternally looked the same. I stayed with Solomon till he passed on, and then I faked my own death days later to be free of the court and meaningless duties. I had only cared about Solomon, and I turned the kingdom over to those who wished to rule. The temple stood in my eyes as the more of a tribute to our love than to Yahweh. I was just happy Solomon had managed to accomplish his greatest desire. He was truly a good and loving man. I would later return to Jerusalem when the temple was being destroyed by the Babylonians as they sacked the city and took the Jewish people into exile. I aided one of Solomon's descendants into rescuing the Ark of the Covenant and relocating it to Ethiopia. But that is a story for another time. Thank you. We'll continue with the myth till it's done in installments. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.